Way past strange. Isobel Gowdie, the sexy, evil, redheaded witch. Most stories about true life witches seem pretty bogus. There is one alleged witch, however, who stands out above all others. When it comes to Isobel Gowdie of Scotland, there may be more than meets the eye. The first unusual thing you'll notice about this witch is her appearance. She was claimed to be a hot, young, red-headed housewife. This is how she's portrayed in almost every painting or illustration made of her. Why is this significant? Well, this was 300 plus years before the TV show Bewitched. Across the board, witches, especially evil ones, were demonized and made to look as ugly as possible in art. Isobel was apparently more endearing to people than most witches, but also quite sinister. The second thing you'll notice about Isobel Gowdie, when it comes to being accused of witchcraft, is the fact that she admitted to it all so freely. Was this woman for real? Did she, in any part, speak the truth? Or was she mentally deranged? Neither answer can simply put her legend to rest, because when it comes to Isobel Gowdie, some things just don't add up. Before Isobel. Isobel Gowdie lived during the time of the Scottish witch trials. These were particularly brutal witch trials that were among Europe's longest and most deadly. It ran from the 16th to 18th centuries. Thousands of women died, and even more were accused. The Scottish were also very inventive with how they would deal with witches, and nothing was deemed too gruesome. This was a dangerous time for a Scottish woman to be alive, especially if you didn't want to toe the line. I'm going to drift from Isobel Gowdie a little bit now, because it's important to understand what led up to the witch trials. How and why did all this start? You can blame it on a thing called the Scottish Reformation. Simply stated, it was the process by which Scotland broke ties with the papacy and the Catholic Church, becoming a mostly Protestant country, specifically Calvinist. It had been coming for a long time, but was officially declared in 1560. You'll find that throughout history, most really terrible epic tragedies stem from religion. The Scottish witch trials were no exception. But how are the two connected? Let me bridge the gap for you. The government and the church were tied at the hip. When the Reformation started, everything became about religion. All the time, everywhere you went, everything you did. Anything that was not about the church was greatly discouraged. The church, or the kirk as it's called in Scotland, was a point of national pride, and Scottish people saw their country as a new Israel. During all this, women got cracked on more than anybody. If you weren't a good little girl and did everything that the menfolk told you, you were greatly disciplined. The more rebellious the woman, the harsher the punishment, and the more inflated the claim of wrongdoing. Women were accused of scolding, which is the act of being an argumentative public nuisance. In the 2020s, being called a Karen was basically the same thing. Prostitution was another harsh accusation leveled at women and thrown around too freely. It didn't have to be proven that a woman took money for sex. Sometimes just associating with the wrong guy could get you called a prostitute. But the harshest thing to be accused of was witchcraft. If someone called you a witch, they wanted you dead, or, at the very least, to ruin your life. After all, if you were a witch, you were in league with Satan. A deeply religious country can't be having no Satan lovers around. Nobody likes being pushed around. If a woman wanted to survive at that time, they had two options. One, you could be blindly obedient to everybody else and become nothing more than a drone. Or two, be as mean and surly as possible in the hopes that nobody messes with you. The latter could work unless someone was really gunning for you. Then they could say witch and spoil your day. John Knox was one of the key figures when it came to starting the Reformation. He was a minister and the founder of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. On the whole scope of things, he didn't get to enjoy his creation long. The Reformation started in 1560, and he died in 1572. Others had to keep this rockin' idea going. No person really kept this going more than King James VI of Scotland. The Reformation started 6 years before he was even born, but no one really drove it more than him. He became king at only 13 months old when his mother Mary was forced to abdicate. In 1581, when he was only 15, James began to assert his independence from the people acting in his behalf and started doing real king stuff. He didn't really have a relationship with his mother, and this could have factored in to why he did some of the things he did. James wanted to build a godly society. At age 31, in 1597, he wrote a book called Daemonology. Nothing more than propaganda for witch hunting. After this, finding and killing witches became royal protocol during his reign. Doing this wasn't a crime, it was encouraged. But why make women the scapegoats? Scotland had a lot of bad stuff going on for a long time. They had been fighting with England for far too long. There were famines. Society was ruled by man, but England and Scotland, before King James came along, had been ruled by queens, so that was a thorn. At the time in Scotland, women were the easiest group of people to push around, and those perceived as the weakest become the scapegoats. It was as simple as that. In 1603, the war was over and King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England and Ireland. He was now bigger and more powerful than ever before. In 1611, he had his own version of the Bible published, the King James Version, further establishing his own agenda. There's nothing like taking the law of the land and tweaking it to suit your needs. Since his time, the King James Version has been changed even further. King James died in 1625 at the age of 58, but what he did would send shockwaves through all of Britain for well over a century, and the effects of it were still felt long after that. Back to Isobel. No one knows exactly when Isobel Gowdie was born. It's one of the many mysteries about her life. Logically speaking, she was born long after the death of King James. That is, unless she was a real cauldron-stirring, broom-riding witch. Then it would be hard to tell just how old she really was during her court appearances. Some people have guessed that Isobel was in her 50s at the time of her trial. She was at least in her 30s. If she still looked like a sexy young redhead at this time, then there would be a cause for people to think she was magical. By all accounts, Isobel was stunningly beautiful. She had fiery red hair, pale white skin, and bright green eyes. She also had the look of sex about her. Isobel would never be confused as a librarian or schoolmarm. There are so many things about Isobel Gowdie that are just plain weird. If you're looking for a lot of detailed personal information about her, you won't find much. That's strange considering the fact she was such a person of interest in the eyes of the authorities. Isobel lived near Loch Loy, a small lake about 2 miles north of a village called Aldern. It's believed she was raised in Aldern. She was married to a man named John Gilbert who was a cotter. This was the Scottish term for a peasant farmer. He had no involvement in her witchcraft case. This is most curious. How did he escape it, and what became of him? Back then, married women retained their maiden names. That's why she is Isobel Gowdie, and not Isobel Gilbert. There are no records of Isobel having any children. It would be surprising if she didn't, considering how sexually active she claimed to be, and, after all, she was married. Isobel and her husband were of a low social status. She was supposed to be illiterate and completely unable to read or write in any form. This is strange by itself when it comes to Isobel. She was certainly smart and quite eloquent when she spoke. She also had quite a base of knowledge on things like spells and chants that would have been extremely difficult to learn without the ability to read. Was Isobel pretending to be illiterate? If so, where would she have learned to read or write? Educational opportunities weren't afforded to people in her station of life. In 1662, Isobel was brought to court for the first in a series of 4 lengthy confessions. This lasted over a period of 6 weeks from April to May. For being an illiterate nobody, she dazzled everyone with her flair for storytelling. Was she making this up, or was there truth to what she was saying? The main thing to remember is that her story was always the same, and she never contradicted herself. If she was lying or insane, she would have made a slip. But from confession to confession, her words never altered. This is an impressive accomplishment because Isobel had a lot to say. Why Isobel confessed is a bigger question. In her time, it was extremely common to torture confessions out of accused witches. Isobel gave her confessions most freely and with enthusiasm. Even if the authorities had tortured Isobel and lied about not doing it in their records, the fact remains that Isobel liked talking about her witchy business and did so knowing that she was probably going to be killed. That, or she had something else in mind. Isobel's confessions were mind-blowing to say the least. There was a lot of stuff she admitted to that people expected to hear, even in 1662. The killing of people, curses, shape-shifting, flying through the air. All of that was pretty common in folklore. Isobel, however, had much to say about her sexual activities as witch and was very detailed and explicit. This is where she gained her reputation as a lusty, fiery nymphomaniac, and no doubt why she is always portrayed as a sexy witch and not an old hag. Confession number 1. It was April 13th, 1662 in Aldern. As it would be for all of her confessions, she was interrogated by ministers and landlords, i.e., religious nuts and people she owed money to. She made fun of the men as they asked her questions. Isobel knew she had nothing to lose and was most likely going to die terribly, so she had fun with it. She also answered using what is called iambic pentameter rhyming chants. William Shakespeare most famously used this type of poetry in his plays. Pretty impressive for an illiterate woman. How was she even able to do this in a trial setting under such pressure? According to Isobel, her life as a witch started 15 years earlier in 1647 at Aldern Church in Nairnshire. A man dressed in grey, who was the devil, met with her at night and initiated her into the coven. The devil gave her the nickname of Janet. This is not to be confused with Janet Redheaded, another member of the coven who would also be tried. Isobel renounced her baptism and the devil put his mark on her shoulder. He then sucked blood from this mark. Isobel named several others who were in this coven. Some were men. They met in a lot of different places, including Nairn and Inshock. Isobel said she had sex with the devil and gave a physical description of him. In his true form, the devil was cold to the touch, large in size, black in color, hairy, and very rough in the way he talked and acted. The devil was no gentleman. He had forked and cloven feet that he covered with shoes or boots. Isobel was always very direct in the things she said. She made it very clear that the power she and the other coven members had came directly from the devil. They referred to the devil as our Lord. Isobel was married. How come John didn't know anything about this? She explained that brooms were laid beside her husband in his bed so he would not notice she was absent. Huh? This is pretty lame. That's more unbelievable than the witch stuff she was talking about. Just the same, it was clear that she was protecting John and didn't want him to be involved at all. Isobel must have cared for him. She also said the devil visited her quite frequently at her house, taking the form of a crow or a deer, among other things. She gave a lot of information about covens and where they partied. They got together at a lot of different places. There were wild orgies. Isobel talked a lot about magical travel. This is all pretty wild and hardly believable. If there was any truth to the things she was saying, it's hard to believe that all of it was true. Isobel claimed that the coven used a plow pulled by frogs instead of horses or oxen, to go through the fields and ruin crops. They also flew through the air on magical horses. Isobel confessed to breaking into the homes of wealthy landowners, eating and drinking everything that was available. The coven urinated in the ale barrels. The rich people of Scotland really made the poor people live in squalor, so this was payback. Isobel and the coven were entertained by the Queen of the Fairies, known as the Queen of Elfame, and her king. She even gave the location of the Fairy Queen's home as Downey Hill, a mound near Nairn. It's important to state that, at this time, most fairies in folklore were depicted as evil. The idea that fairies are cute and helpful is something that developed in popular fiction in more recent centuries. The Queen of Elfame is a name that popped up at least 4 centuries before Isobel's time, and long after her confessions. Scholars and skeptics make a point of noting how colorful of a storyteller Isobel Gowdie was, but she brought up some rather specific things that line up with things said by other people she never knew or met. If Isobel was the Queen of BS, where was she getting it from? The Queen of Elfame's home was filled with water bowls that frightened Isobel. What's a water bowl, and why was it scary? A water bowl is a mythological creature in Scotland. Odd enough, people still believed in these beasts until at least the end of the 19th century. They were huge, black, bull-like beasts that could be evil and vicious. In some cases, they could be friendly and helpful. Water bowls could shapeshift into human form, and they could live in water or on land. These creatures could mate with ordinary cows, leading to sickly calves and the death of the cows after giving birth. In other words, water bowls' main purpose was to destroy herds. If an offspring survived, it was believed that it had to be killed right away to keep it from carrying on the misdeeds of its father. One way it could not be killed was by drowning, as these monsters came from the water to begin with. It's all pretty crazy, but Scottish people believed in water bowls pretty much since civilization began, and for hundreds and hundreds of years after Isobel. When something is that persistent, it does make you wonder if there is anything to it. Isobel's landlord was the Laird of Park. She made clay effigies of his male children to cause them suffering or death. It's believed that the cruel landlord may have sexually harassed and assaulted Isobel. This may have been one of the things that pushed her into witchcraft and certainly made her vengeful. The coven plotted to blight a farmer's field. How did they do this? They dug up a child's body from the cemetery. Afterwards, they took the body apart in pieces and shared it with another coven. They buried pieces of this child's body in the farmer's compost pile, which worked against the fertility of his fields. Isobel claimed to be able to turn herself into various animals, including a jackdaw, which is like a crow or raven, but smaller. She could also turn herself into a hare. The hare is the animal she is most famous for transforming into. A lot of artwork based on Isobel Gowdie will still feature the hare. She and the other members of the coven turned themselves into various animals, including cats, and visited the house of Alexander Cummings, tormenting him. She also stated that while in their animal forms, they could change a person into that animal and force them to follow. It was an unusual form of abduction, to say the least, but offered an explanation to people who went missing. Isobel was quite physically descriptive in her testimonies, and not everything she said made it into the official records. Why? Well, back then, if the notaries felt what she was saying was irrelevant, they just wrote down etc. to cut it short. However, in Isobel's case, it was believed that she simply gave them far more information than they could keep up with. It would be interesting to know what the courts left out and why. She was already talking about some pretty heavy stuff. What was Isobel saying that these people of power did not want the rest of the world to know? Confession number 2. On May 3rd, 1662, a little over 2 weeks after Isobel's first confession, is when the second one took place. Much like today, people want the sequels to be even better. Isobel didn't disappoint. Isobel revealed that there were 13 members in her coven. She also revealed the Queen of the Coven, or Maiden as it was termed, as Jane Martin. People believe that the classic notion of having 13 witches in a coven came directly from Isobel Gowdie. She gave the nicknames of the coven members, and the names of their personal imps, or servant spirits if you will. The imps dressed in various colors. Isobel's personal imp was named Reed Reaver, and he dressed in black. Imps are smaller demons, but more mischievous than seriously threatening. In this confession, she started reciting magical chants. Included in this confession were chants for turning into a cat, horse, and other animals. Over the course of her 4 confessions, a total of 27 good or evil chants were given, more than in any other British witchcraft case. One of the most interesting things to come out of this confession, I think, is the raising of the wind. Isobel claimed that she and the other witches had the power not only to start a great wind, but to stop it as well. They wet rags in water and beat them on stones to start the wind. To stop the wind, they would dry the rags. All of this while saying specific chants. What I think is most interesting about this statement is that Isobel also said that the coven couldn't make rain. In other words, she never said that a witch's power was limitless. That makes what she has been saying a little more believable. Another instance of Isobel saying what witches couldn't do came to shapeshifting. She said that they could not turn themselves into lambs or doves. Why? Who knows? What's witchcraft without rules, right? Isobel claimed to have seen the devil make elf bolts, also called elf arrows. These are small, triangular flints used as arrows. These elf bolts could mortally wound its target without breaking the skin. They were usually fatal to cattle and could kill a man, even if he was wearing protective armor. The devil would start making them, but he had what she called elf boys put the finishing touches on them. Each coven member got a certain number of these elf bolts, as prescribed by the devil himself. Bows were not needed to shoot these arrows. You simply flicked them with your thumb. Isobel said that the witches were not always accurate when they shot these elf bolts, but when they made contact, they were fatal. Harry Forbes, the local minister, was a specific target for the coven spells, cast to inflict illness and torment upon him. Forbes was a religious radical with an extreme fear of witchcraft. He was present at all of Isobel's trials, and was most assuredly one of the key players in having her indicted. She was purposely trying to scare him to death, and it was working. Forbes actually had suffered from mysterious illnesses, so what she was saying was relevant to him. Isobel and her husband were poor peasant farmers, but they had experienced an upswing in their finances. She claimed that she would slip a swallow's feather in with whatever she was selling, be it cattle, cloth, horses, whatever. Then she would say a chant. Isobel and her husband would get 3 times the money for these items that they ever did before. It's hard to say whether the courts verified these claims, but if Isobel was, in fact, getting these prices, then there was definitely something weird going on. Isobel also claimed that the witches could heal any sore or broken limb instantly by stroking the sore spot and saying a specific chant. They could also cure fevers. Confession number 3. Nearly 2 weeks later, on May 15th, Isobel was brought to court for a third go-around. It's hard to say how many people in that room believed what she was saying, but she was so entertaining that they wanted to hear more. Today she would be a better writer than anyone in Hollywood. Like the confession before, she gave a recap of events and elaborated upon what she started talking about the previous time. Concerning the elf bolts, she actually revealed the names of those killed and the names of the witches who killed them. Isobel expressed her regret for the deaths she caused, the only time she seemed repentant for being a witch, although this is probably a hollow gesture. She was a smart woman, and it would have been stupid to expect anything but a grisly death after her confessions were done. Sorry wasn't going to get it. She also gave an account of the devil sending her on an errand to Alderan, disguised as a hare. Isobel, in her rabbit form, was chased by a pack of dogs. The Bad Bunny ran from house to house until she got the chance to say the chant to transform herself back into a human. Isobel went on to say that, while in animal form, a witch could be bitten by a dog but never killed. However, the bite marks and scars would still show on the witch's body when she was in human form. She went on to talk about partying with the devil and how he beat members of the coven. Isobel got into heavy detail about sex with the devil, including descriptions of his genitalia. She also got more descriptive about the orgy she had with her coven. Isobel said that neither the devil or the coven had any shame and nothing was off limits, but the devil was especially funky. Another thing Isobel added was the chant used while burning the effigies of the Laird of Park's male children, as talked about in her first confession. She also revealed that the goal in doing this was to make the Laird of Park heirless, ending his family's reign of power on the land. It's important to note that the Laird did lose male children. Confession number 4. 12 days later, on May 27th, Isobel was brought back for her fourth and final confession. Considering how interesting the rest of it had been, this was a pretty duddy finale. The purpose of it was basically to confirm the 3 previous testimonies, along with an attempt to get more information about the members of the coven to enable charges to be brought against them. The confessions of Isobel Gowdie, along with Janet Redhead, another witch in her coven, led to the arrest of 41 people. What happened to Isobel? Your guess is as good as anyone's. It's most reasonable to assume Isobel Gowdie was executed. However, no record of Isobel being executed exists. In one way, this can be explained. It's believed that 90% of the records for the Scottish witch trials are just lost. In another way, the mystery of Isobel's fate is bizarre. She wasn't just another woman on trial for witchcraft. She was a superstar. What Isobel had to say was so bizarre, fantastic, and if you believe there are witches, quite revealing. The court would have made an example of Isobel and planned something special for her. Is it possible that the court let Isobel walk? After all, what she had to say led to a lot of other witches going down. Her confessions were the ultimate plea bargain. Some historians believe that Isobel could have been released for the fact that they found her insane. That's possible, but insanity defenses couldn't get you as far back in the 1600s as they do today. Plus, Isobel didn't really strike anyone as a babbling idiot. She came off as someone who was well versed and quite evil. Maybe Isobel went back home to her husband and lived out the rest of her life in quiet obscurity. That's hard to believe, but like the old movie cowboys, Isobel just seemed to ride off into the sunset. Isobel lives on. Hunting witches in Scotland was made illegal in 1735. The thrill was gone, although some wanted to keep it going. People started to doubt Satan had that much power. It made God seem less powerful, and that just wouldn't do. Plus, there was just too much death and misery. Isobel Gowdie's confessions were first reproduced by the historian Robert Pitcairn in 1833, 171 years after the fact. This is the main source of information we have on Isobel. It has been looked over closely by historians and even practitioners of witchcraft. Isobel Gowdie is extremely significant. She stands out for many reasons. Her confessions are a blend of demonic and fairy beliefs without equal in any other witchcraft case. She gave more details than most witches did, and much of what she said was inconsistent with what others believed about witches before then. Isobel was a true original. It's possible that Isobel was just a fantastic storyteller, whether she was a con artist or truly insane. She was very coherent, and much of what she said was tied to things that were actual fact. There are a lot of questions I have about the trial of Isobel Gowdie. What was omitted from the records, and why was it omitted? Not everything she said was wanted to be known by anyone at any time. Something happened in that courtroom. Wouldn't it be cool if Isobel actually turned herself into an animal and ran away? That would explain why there is no record of her execution. Also, why did it take nearly 200 years for these court records to be discovered by some random guy, found in an unlabeled box that belonged to the Laird of Park, the landlord and employer of Gowdie and her husband? In the realm of historical figures, Isobel Gowdie has a more cult-like following than some people. In spite of this, she has been a character in works of literature, plays, and radio broadcasts. There have been songs and symphonies made about her. There have also been a number of paintings and illustrations. There has also been talk of Isobel's ghost. A spirit referred to as the Green Lady has been reported as haunting the area of Valdarin and Nairn to this day. Is this green ghost really Isobel? If this really is her spirit, is she here by choice or by punishment for her misdeeds? What is Isobel's ghost's purpose? Nothing is so cut and dry when it comes to Isobel Gowdie, and all of it is way past strange.